Hello, and welcome to Question in a Bottle. In this series of short discussions, private investor Mark Atkinson answers questions sent in by listeners and subscribers to his main podcast, The Desert Island Investor. So, let's take a look and see what's in the bottle that washed up on the beach today.
Right, we have another question from our very good friend Paul Igoe. Thanks for your question, Paul. Hi, Mark. How far into your investment journey did you start to believe you could eventually become a full-time investor and give up your day job? Did you think about it overnight, or was it a gradual thing that was years in the planning? It's an interesting question, Paul, and a path that numerous other private investors will have trod. My first interest in the stock market started in the living room of 148 Olive Lane, Darwin. There is not a blue plaque over the door with my name on it. But rather than having school dinners, I went to my grandparents. And while there, I read their Daily Express, which I would argue was a better paper then than it is today. Being sport mad, I started at the back page and worked my way into the paper from that end. And it wasn't long before I reached the business section. And although only, say, 13, 14, 15, I started following the articles and fortunes of certain companies. And the categories were very different to today. There was a whole host of brewery groups, for example, that I remember. Now, I had a building society account where the interest, albeit modest, was added annually. And despite my tender age, I remember thinking that if I had enough capital, then I'd be able to live off this. It was just a matter of scale. I didn't have the term at hand, but it's what we know as passive income. So perhaps investing in companies would assist me towards this goal. That was the thought process. So the idea that I could one day become a full-time investor actually started before I'd begun investing. I had this broad plan, but without any means or avenue into this world. So we move on a couple of years, and I started work at 17, and I had a modest income stream. Then shortly after, the government started floating nationalised businesses like BT and British Gas. These were open to the public. You could cut out your application form from any one of a number of national newspapers and sent it off together with your cheque, if you remember those. And suddenly I was up and running. Now, work certainly was a culture change, a culture shock. And one of the first things that struck me was what a long day it was. Not just the time that you're actually at work, but the added time through commuting. This was very, very different to being at school. And there was also a culture to come in on Saturday mornings for some reason to show that you were keen. And this was an early example of presenteeism. And as a young man, this all seemed pretty futile. Managers would come in their civvies and they'd write out a few things that they deliberately held over from the previous day and then talk about football and study the racing page. And there were a million better things that I could think of that were a better use of my time. And, you know, if we look at work, most jobs consist of conducting a series of repetitive tasks, doing the same thing day in, day out. Now, it was a big place, and every few weeks, some old duffer would shuffle into the office, and these were retirees from another department who dropped by to say cheerio. And when asked what they intended to do with the retirement, I remember thinking that they didn't look fit for much. These were old men or old ladies. And as a fresh-faced, apple-cheeked teenager, my thoughts were, is this the deal? Well, how wrong I was. The pace of work has accelerated and the working day is being extended in general. Back in the day, as a reward for long service and a recognition of advancing years, employees would often be put out to grass and found a little cushy role to while away the run into retirement. But now, anybody approaching retirement has to pedal just as hard as the next person. And back then, the state retirement age was 65 for men and only 60 for women. And this has been put back universally to, I think it's 67 now, and in the process of probably being pushed back further and further. And broadly, it was management that had to experience any kind of stress. But now everybody seems to have a number to chase with those ever-stretching KPIs and the annual appraisal and monthly assessments. And with the advent of emails and mobile phones, these are often invasion of our off time, and the work-home life is increasingly blurred. So work was demanding, but you do become conditioned to this time-poor world. You accept this treadmill and you learn to cherish the weekend. Alas, very often this is the way of things. So I started investing at 18 and I retired at 53. And you may think that I had to wait 35 years to enjoy the fruits of this involvement. Well, incorrect. When you start investing, progress is very difficult to identify. If you look at that compounding curve, it looks like a hockey stick. And in those beginner years, it feels like nothing is happening. I remember receiving dividends for, say, £20, and the next year it was perhaps £22. It was hardly life-changing and growing at a snail's pace, and you can understand why many people would abandon the strategy through what they may consider a lack of progress or boredom. However, by the time I was in my 30s, I could sense the traction. Elaine and I were vying for who was the breadwinner, but there was also a third income stream to consider: the portfolio, the dividends from which were forever being reinvested. Now, on a couple of occasions, I was approached by customers to join them in a more senior position. Now, for one, I really enjoyed the job I had. I was employed by an Italian paper manufacturer, a little shout out for them, Cartiere Burgo, but also any increase in salary against my current salary, Elaine's, and the ever-growing portfolio would not have changed our lifestyle on the upside by a discernible degree. On the downside, however, it would have brought more responsibility, managing other people, which has never been an ambition of mine, and robbed me of the one thing that I treasure: free time. We had 2 young children, and any further work involvement would have put more pressure on Elaine's shoulders, and she herself had her own career to pursue. We had to balance our career levels. But what I really wanted to do was spend time with my family and not let this period pass me by, and support and encourage them as they developed their own characters and their interests and skills, plus enjoy my own hobbies and pastimes, which have given me great fun and satisfaction in this life that we only get one go at. I had created a portfolio which was, as today, light touch, and I could manage this alongside my job and the all-important family life. Now, I have a peer who built up his own business. It's been very successful. He and his partner worked every hour God sent from their late 20s. They moved into successively larger premises, but his partner had a heart attack in his late 30s. Now, my friend was a member of a top golf club that he never had the time to play at, and he had a holiday home that he never visited. And he missed, I would argue, quality time with his family. Now he's got time to smell the roses, but he can never get that time back. He's had a great life. He's enjoyed it, but that was not for me. Now, I would often listen to colleagues lamenting that they would never be able to retire. And while I nodded in agreement, secretly knew that this would not apply to me. It was not ever stretching into the distance, but was within touching distance, and a great comfort if I'd ever had a bad day. Now, while I saw others desperate for that promotion or stabbing one another in the back in the corporate rat pit, I just followed my own steady path, increasingly taking control of my own destiny. And I think for a lot of my colleagues, my stance must have been quite confusing because they weren't aware of the backstory. I did not require that promotion or that big new company car's display of my worth to others. With investing, I found that no office politics, no petty squabbles, turf wars, people trying to assert themselves or debase my position, or that sense of having to be what I call on. Investing was an oasis, and I would live or die with my own decisions, and this is something I can readily accept. What started as an insignificant trifle was steadily becoming a higher percentage of the family income, to the point where it exceeded my own salary and other peripherals. However, unlike a salary, stock market gains do not feel like they have the same permanence. One swallow does not make a summer, and I maintain the work investing balance. And this became something of a double life, where the visible side of me was Mark the salesman, and the other Mark the investor. Perhaps not exactly Bruce Wayne and Batman, but Dick Grayson and Robin. Now, one day I would be sat unassumingly at my desk behind my laptop, and the next attending an annual general meeting, putting a probing question to the CEO. At your annual appraisal, when asked what are your aims for developing your career over the next 5 years, it's probably not advisable to say that I intend to have amassed enough wealth and I'll be off in the next 2. So there did become a point, however, where I did personally switch from thinking of myself as a salesman who invested to an investor who also works. And it's not like light and dark where this happens overnight. It was over a gradual period, but there is a gradual dawning that this really is my core income job. And it was very much how I'd started to identify myself. This is where my ambition was directed, my creativity, where I had job satisfaction and a sense of self-worth. And I had control over the decision-making process. And I didn't have to argue my case with somebody else whose motives were simply perhaps to stymie me rather than thinking of what was for the best. So on one hand, I didn't reach my full potential in my conventional career, but I had a strong sense of achievement with my investing, and the rewards and fruits of which were all enjoyed by my family and myself. Being conservative in nature, I went beyond what in retrospect was the work finishing line. In your late 40s or early 50s, perhaps you think I can't retire now, and that's not what people do. You consider your investments may turn sour, or that in your personal life there will be what Donald Rumsfeld called known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Also, given my investing style, this involves interacting with large numbers of people and listening to them. And I was surrounded by customers and colleagues and contacts, and using them as an information stream, not about investing per se, but how they were leading their lives and what they'd observed and how they were spending their money. And I was partly concerned that if this dynamic was severed, which had always been around me since I'd been investing, then I could perhaps become detached from how the world worked. And I've always thought that I've learned a lot more from listening than speaking. So going into work knowing that you can press the quit button at any point is a great position to be in. And I knew I was nearing the end. But when I pulled up on the office car park that day, I didn't know that was to be what you could call quit day. Something occurred, which was one shoddy and shabby incident too many. And at 52, probably my managing director thought I'd just have to suck it up. He didn't know my secret life. So I rang Elaine and discussed it, and she just said, look, slap it in today. You're better than that. And I had a full support and her blessing, and I just typed out the resignation letter, handed it in, and set off doing something better for the rest of my life. So, at that point, I had enough behind me. I had a consistent track record over decades, and I was able to leave the shambles behind. So in retrospect, given that I don't think I've become detached, I've replaced these customers and contacts with more people outside of the work environment. My cash burn is not what I'd envisioned, and that the investments in this last 4 or 5 years have continued to push on. I do wish I'd done this sooner. No matter how much money I have, I cannot buy more time. I wake up in the morning and decide, what do I want to do today? And having choice is a great luxury, and long may it continue. People invest in commodities. The most valuable one I know of is time, free time. So, Paul, thanks for your question. I hope I've answered it in a roundabout way. Thank you.
Well, that's all for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember the content is for information only and it is not financial advice. If you have a question for Mark for our Question in a Bottle podcast, just complete the form on our website, thedesertislandinvestor.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.